I thought I was just an ordinary retail manager from Ohio, living a quiet life with my husband and 2 kids. Then a simple ancestry DNA test changed everything, connecting me to a world I never imagined I belonged to, and a Hollywood A-lister who had no idea I existed. My name is Jessica, and I'm 34 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio, where I manage a small clothing boutique downtown. My life has always been pretty predictable, the kind of predictable that some people might call boring, but I've always found comforting. I married my college sweetheart, David, when I was 26, and we have 2 beautiful children, Emma, who's 8, and little Tyler, who just turned 5. Growing up, I was always the kid who felt a little out of place, not in a dramatic, movie of a week kind of way, but in those subtle ways that make you wonder if you really belong where you are. My parents, Linda and Robert, are both incredibly down-earth people. My dad worked at the local power plant for 37 years before retiring, and my mom spent most of my childhood as a secretary at our elementary school. They're good people, solid, reliable, the kind of folks who never missed a PTA meeting and always had dinner on the table by 6. But I was different. While my parents were content with their simple routines, I found myself drawn to things that seemed completely foreign to our household. I devoured celebrity magazines, not because I was obsessed with fame, but because I was fascinated by the stories behind the glamour. I'd spend hours watching old movies on TCM, studying the way actors could transform themselves into completely different people. My parents would find me crying at the end of Casablanca or laughing hysterically at a Marx Brothers film, and they'd just shake their heads with bemused smiles. Where does she get it from? My mom would ask my dad, not in a mean way, but with genuine curiosity. Neither of them had any particular interest in entertainment or the arts. They were more likely to watch the evening news than a movie. More interested in the local high school football scores than anything happening in Hollywood. The differences became more pronounced as I got older. In high school, while my friends were focused on fitting in and following trends, I found myself naturally gravitating toward leadership roles. I was student body president junior year, starred in our school's production of Our Town, and somehow managed to convince our principal to let us start a drama club. I wasn't trying to be different or rebellious. These things just felt natural to me in a way that my parents' more reserved lifestyle never did. My mom would often joke that I was too big for our small town, but there was always something in her eyes when she said it. Not disappointment exactly, but maybe a kind of wistfulness. Like she was seeing something in me that reminded her of someone else. Gosh. I used to wonder if she was thinking about her own dreams when she was young, but whenever I asked about her childhood or her aspirations, she'd change the subject pretty quickly. College was where I really came into my own. I went to Ohio State, just a couple hours from home, and majored in communications with a minor in theater. That's where I met David during my sophomore year. He was studying engineering, and we were as different as 2 people could be. Where I was impulsive and creative, he was methodical and practical. Where I dreamed of maybe moving to New York or Los Angeles someday, he was already planning out our life in Ohio with spreadsheets and 5-year plans. But somehow it worked. David grounded me in the best possible way. He didn't try to change me or dampen my more creative impulses, but he helped me channel them into something sustainable. When I talked about maybe trying to make it as an actress, he didn't laugh or tell me to be realistic. Instead, he helped me research the industry, the statistics, the realities of trying to break in. Together, we came up with a compromise. I'd give myself 2 years after graduation to pursue acting seriously, and if it didn't work out, we'd settle down and start our life together in Ohio. Those 2 years were a whirlwind. I moved to Chicago, got a tiny studio apartment, and threw myself into the audition circuit. I booked a few small roles in local theater productions, did some commercial work, and even landed a tiny part in an independent film that nobody ever saw. But David was right about the realities of the industry. For every small success, there were dozens of rejections, and the financial stress was overwhelming. After 18 months, I was barely scraping by, surviving on ramen noodles and the occasional check from my parents. The final straw came when I auditioned for a role that I was absolutely perfect for. Or at least I thought I was. It was a supporting character in a regional theater production. A young woman from the Midwest trying to make it in the big city. I prepared for weeks, nailed the audition, and felt more confident than I ever had. When they called to tell me I didn't get the part, the casting director was surprisingly honest with her feedback. "You're talented, Jessica. Really talented," she said. "But you don't have that thing that makes people stop and stare. You're beautiful, you're skilled, but you're not memorable in the way that this industry demands. You probably have a lovely career in community theater, or maybe teaching, but breaking through to the next level, I just don't see it happening. It was devastating, but it was also exactly what I needed to hear. I called David that night, crying so hard I could barely speak. He drove to Chicago the next morning, helped me pack up my little apartment, and brought me home to Ohio. We got engaged 6 months later and married the following summer. Our wedding was exactly what you'd expect from two people like us. Small, traditional, held at my parents' church with a reception at the local VFW hall. My mom cried during the ceremony, and my dad gave a speech about how proud he was that I'd found someone who could keep up with me. David's parents, who were just as practical and grounded as he was, welcomed me into their family with warm, steady affection. The early years of our marriage were blissful in their simplicity. David got a job with a local engineering firm, and I found work at the boutique where I eventually became manager. We bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors and kids ride bikes in the street until the streetlights come on. When Emma was born, I felt like my life had finally clicked into place. Here was this perfect little person who was half me and half David, and she seemed to embody the best qualities of both of us. Emma was an easy baby, but she was also clearly my daughter. Even as a toddler, she had this natural charisma that drew people to her. She'd walk into a room and somehow become the center of attention without even trying. Strangers would stop us at the grocery store to comment on her expressive eyes and natural charm. She started talking early, and her vocabulary was impressive even by proud parent standards. By age 3, she was putting on elaborate performances for anyone who would watch, complete with costume changes and multiple characters. Tyler came along 3 years later, and he was David's son through and through. Quiet, thoughtful, methodical in the way he approached everything from building blocks to potty training. While Emma was performing impromptu concerts in our living room, Tyler was content to sit quietly with his books or work on puzzles that were meant for kids twice his age. But even as I settled into this comfortable life, there was always a part of me that wondered about the bigger picture, not in a dissatisfied way. I loved my family and my life, but sometimes I'd catch glimpses of myself in the mirror and think about that casting director's words. You don't have that thing that makes people stop and stare. Was that really true? Or was there something about me, about where I came from, that I just didn't understand yet? My parents had always been a little vague about our family history. When I'd ask about grandparents or great-grandparents, they'd give me basic information, but never the kind of rich family stories that my friends seemed to have. My dad's parents had died when I was very young, and my mom's mother passed away before I was born. Her father had died when she was a teenager. She rarely talked about him except to say that he'd been a good man who left too soon. It wasn't that they were secretive exactly, but there was definitely a sense that our family history wasn't something we dwelled on. We're here now. That's what matters, my mom would say whenever I pressed for more details. Some families have lots of stories to tell, but we've always been the type to focus on the present. I accepted that explanation for years, but becoming a mother myself made me more curious about Emma and Tyler's heritage. What traits were they inheriting? What talents or challenges might be coded into their DNA? David's family history was like an open book. Generations of engineers and teachers and small business owners, all documented in careful family trees and photo albums. But my side remained mysteriously sparse. That's what eventually led me to the idea of doing a DNA test. It started as idle curiosity, really. I'd seen the commercials for those ancestry websites, and I thought it might be fun to see what countries our ancestors came from. Maybe I'd discover we had some exotic heritage that would explain my creative impulses, or Tyler's analytical mind, or Emma's natural magnetism. At the very least, I figured it might give me some interesting conversation starters at dinner parties. David was supportive but skeptical. "What are you hoping to find?" he asked, when I showed him the test kit I'd ordered online. "I mean, you're regardless of whether your great-great-grandmother was Irish or Italian or whatever." He was right, of course. But there was something compelling about the possibility of filling in those blank spaces in our family story. I wanted to be able to tell Emma and Tyler about the people they came from, the dreams and struggles and triumphs that had led to their existence. Every family deserves to know their story, and I was starting to realize that we barely knew the first chapter of ours. Little did I know that this simple curiosity about my heritage would lead to the most shocking discovery of my life and connect me to a world I'd only ever dreamed of being part of. The DNA test kit sat on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks before I actually worked up the nerve to use it. It's funny how something so small and innocuous can feel so loaded with possibility and fear. Every morning I'd see that little box while making coffee, and every evening I'd notice it again while cleaning up after dinner. David started teasing me about it, calling it my commitment issues in a box. Finally, Emma noticed it during breakfast one Saturday morning. "Mommy, what's that thing?" she asked, pointing at the kit with her spoonful of cereal. "It's a test that can tell us about our family history," I explained, trying to sound casual. It's like what countries our ancestors came from. Emma's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that only a 2-year-olds can muster for the most random things. "Can we find out if we're princesses?" she asked seriously, as I've always felt like maybe I'm a princess who got lost. David laughed, but something about Emma's comment struck me. She'd always had this sense that she was somehow different from the rest of us. Not in a bratty or entitled way, but with a kind of innate confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than just being a well-loved child. Teachers and other parents constantly commented on her natural leadership abilities and her almost magnetic personality. "She's going to be someone special," they'd say, and I'd always smile and agree. But privately I wondered where that specialness came from. That afternoon, I finally opened the kit. The process was surprisingly simple, just spitting into a tube and mailing it back to the lab. Emma insisted on helping, treating the whole thing like a science experiment. "Maybe we'll find out we're related to famous people," she said as we sealed the package. "Wouldn't that be cool, Mommy?" I agreed that it would be cool, but I wasn't expecting anything that dramatic. In my mind, I was hoping to discover maybe some interesting ethnic heritage, or connect with some distant cousins who might have family photos or stories to share. The idea that we might be related to anyone famous seemed like pure childhood fantasy. The waiting period was supposed to be 6 to 8 weeks, but I found myself checking my email obsessively after just 2 weeks. Every notification made my heart skip a little, wondering if this would be the moment I finally learned something new about my family's past. David found my impatience amusing, but there was something deeper driving my curiosity than I'd initially admitted to myself. During those weeks of waiting, I started paying closer attention to the little mysteries in my family that I'd always accepted without question. Like why my mom never wanted to watch award shows or entertainment news. Whenever something about Hollywood came on TV, she'd either change the channel or find an excuse to leave the room. I'd always assumed she just wasn't interested in celebrity culture. But now I started wondering if there was something more to it. There were also the phone calls. Throughout my childhood, my mom would occasionally receive calls that made her visibly uncomfortable. She'd answer with her usual cheerful voice, but her tone would quickly shift to something clipped and careful. "That's not something I can help you with," she'd say, or "I think you have the wrong person." When I'd ask who called, she'd always give vague answers. Someone who had the wrong number, or just a salesperson. But the most puzzling thing was my mom's reaction. Whenever anyone commented on my appearance or personality, when teachers or friends' parents would say things like, "Jessica has such presence for someone so young," or "She really lights up a room," my mom would get this strange expression on her face. Not proud exactly, though. There was pride there, but something more complicated. Almost like she was seeing a ghost. About a month into the waiting period, something happened that made these observations feel more significant. I was at the boutique, helping a customer find an outfit for a wedding, when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence and stared at me. "Has anyone ever told you that you look like someone famous?" she asked, tilting her head and studying my face with intense concentration. I laughed it off, the way I always did when people made comments like that. I get that sometimes, but I can never figure out who they mean. I think I just have one of those faces. But she kept staring, and I could see her mentally flipping through some catalog of faces in her mind. "It's driving me crazy," she said. "You look exactly like." "No, that's impossible. But the resemblance is incredible." She never did tell me who she thought I looked like, but the interaction stayed with me. It wasn't the first time someone had said something like that, but it was the most intense reaction I'd ever gotten. Combined with my growing awareness of all the little mysteries surrounding my family history, it started to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern I hadn't been paying attention to. Around the same time, Emma started asking more questions about our family. It began innocently enough. a school project about family trees that required her to go back at least 3 generations. She came home frustrated because she couldn't fill in most of the branches. "Why don't we have pictures of your grandparents, Mommy?" she asked one evening while working on the project at our kitchen table. "All my friends have lots of pictures of their grandparents and great-grandparents and stuff." I realized she was right. David's side of the family had albums full of photos going back decades. But our house contained almost no visual evidence of my family's history. There were a few pictures of my parents from when they were younger, but nothing from before they met in their early 20s. No wedding photos of my grandparents, no family reunions, no holiday gatherings with extended relatives. "Some families don't take as many pictures," I told her. But even as I said it, the explanation felt insufficient. In an age when everyone documents everything, how does a family manage to leave so few traces of their past? That weekend, I decided to visit my parents and ask some more direct questions. They lived about 20 minutes away, in the same house where I'd grown up. I still came by every couple of weeks for Sunday dinner. But this time I had an agenda. I waited until after we'd eaten, and Emma and Tyler were playing in the backyard with the dog. My dad was dozing in his recliner, and my mom was loading the dishwasher when I brought up the DNA test. "Oh, that sounds interesting," she said, but there was something forced about her enthusiasm. "What made you decide to do something like that?" I explained about Emma's family tree project and my general curiosity about our heritage. As I talked, I watched my mom's face carefully. She kept her attention focused on the dishes, but I could see tension creeping into her shoulders. "I was hoping maybe you could tell me more about your dad," I said casually. "Emma's curious about her great-grandfather, and I realized I don't know much about him beyond the basics." My mom's hands stilled for just a moment before she resumed scrubbing a plate that was already clean. "There's not much to tell," she said. "He died when I was 17. Heart attack."
Very sudden.
"But what was he like? What did he do for work? Did he have any brothers or sisters?" The question seemed simple enough, but my mom's discomfort was becoming more obvious by the minute. She finished with the dishes and started wiping down counters that didn't need wiping. "He was a good man," she said finally. "Worked hard, loved his family. That's what matters, isn't it?" It was the same vague response I'd been getting my whole life, but this time I pressed a little harder. "Do you have any pictures of him? I'd love for the kids to see what their great-grandfather looked like." My mom stopped wiping the counter and turned to face me. For a moment, I thought she was going to get angry, but instead she looked almost scared. "Jessica, some things are better left in the past," she said quietly. "Your father and I have built a good life here, and so have you. Sometimes digging around in old history just brings up pain that doesn't need to be revisited." It was such an unusual response from my mom, who had always been open and straightforward about everything. The only time I'd ever seen her avoid a topic this deliberately was when I was a kid asking where babies came from. Even then, she'd eventually given me an honest, age-appropriate explanation. I let the conversation drop that day, but my mind was racing during the drive home. What kind of pain could there be in talking about a grandfather who died decades ago? Why were there no photos, no stories, no connection to any extended family on my mom's side? And why did she seem almost frightened by the idea of me learning more about our family history? That night, I found myself lying awake next to David, staring at the ceiling and trying to piece together all the little inconsistencies I'd been noticing. The mysterious phone calls, my mom's reaction to anything entertainment related, the way people sometimes said I looked familiar, the complete absence of family history or photos, and now her obvious discomfort with my questions about her father. "You're overthinking this," David mumbled, when I whispered my concerns to him in the dark. "Some families are just more private than others. Maybe your mom's dad wasn't a great guy, or maybe there was some kind of family drama that she doesn't want to rehash. Not everything has to be a mystery." He was probably right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger here. Something that my parents had been carefully protecting me from my entire life, and that I was about to discover whether I was ready for it or not. 2 weeks later, the email arrived. The subject line was simple and straightforward. "Your Ancestry results are ready." It appeared in my inbox on a Tuesday morning, while I was getting the kids ready for school, and I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. Then I remembered the test I'd taken 2 months earlier and felt my heart start to race. I stared at that email for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Emma was asking where her favorite sweater was. Tyler was complaining that his cereal was getting soggy. And David was looking for his car keys, but all I could focus on was those 7 words that promised to finally give me some answers about my family's mysterious past. Mommy.
Die.
Are you okay? Emma asked, tugging on my pajama pants. You look like you saw a ghost. In a way, maybe I had. The results of that DNA test felt like they might contain the ghosts of relatives I'd never known about. Stories that had been buried for reasons I still couldn't understand. And possibly explanations for all the little mysteries that had been nagging at me my entire life. I'm fine, sweetheart, I managed to say, closing my laptop and focusing on the morning routine. Just got distracted by an email. But I wasn't fine. All day at the boutique, I found myself thinking about that unopened email. Every time there was a lull in customers, I'd pull out my phone and stare at it, but I couldn't bring myself to click the link. What if the results were disappointing? What if they confirmed that we were just ordinary people from ordinary backgrounds with no interesting heritage or family connections? Or worse, what if they revealed something that explained my parents' secrecy in a way I wasn't prepared to handle? Around lunchtime, my assistant manager noticed my distraction. You seem really off today, she said during a quiet moment. Everything okay at home? I told her about the DNA test, and she got excited in the way that people do when they hear about other people's family discoveries. Oh my God, you have to check it right now. My cousin did one of those and found out she was related to someone who came over on the Mayflower. My neighbor discovered she had a half-sister in California that her dad never told her about. The half-sister comment made my stomach clench. What if my results revealed family members I'd never heard of? What if there were siblings or cousins or even grandparents still alive that my parents had kept hidden from me? The more I thought about all the possibilities, the more anxious I became. I decided to wait until I got home to open the results. This felt like the kind of moment that deserved proper attention, not a quick scroll through my phone during a work break. But the anticipation was killing me. I kept imagining different scenarios. Maybe I'd discover we were descended from royalty, or artists, or immigrants, who'd overcome incredible odds to build better lives for their children. Maybe I'd finally understand where Emma's natural charisma came from, or why I'd always felt drawn to creative pursuits, despite growing up in a family that didn't seem to share those interests. When I picked up the kids from school that afternoon, I was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Emma immediately picked up on my mood. You're acting weird, Mom, she announced as we drove home, like excited, weird, but also scared weird. I got the results from that DNA test today, I explained. I'm nervous about what they might say. Why would you be nervous? Tyler asked from his car seat. It's just going to tell us what countries we're from, right? Out of the mouths of babes. It was absolutely right. This was supposed to be a simple exploration of our ethnic heritage, maybe with some information about distant relatives. There was no logical reason for me to be this anxious about opening the results, but something in my gut told me that what I was about to discover would be anything but simple. David got home earlier than usual that day, and I could tell he was curious too, even though he'd been pretending the whole DNA test thing was silly. So, he said, as he loosened his tie, did you get your results back yet? I nodded toward my laptop, which was sitting closed on the kitchen counter, like it contained a bomb. It came this morning, but I haven't looked yet. What are you waiting for? He asked, but his tone was gentle. I could see how nervous I was, even if he didn't entirely understand why. I guess I'm scared they'll be boring, I admitted. Like, what if we're just generic European mutts with no interesting family history at all? What if this whole mystery I've been building up in my head is just my imagination? David pulled me into a hug. Then we'll be boring generic European mutts together, and that'll be fine too. But honestly, Jess, you've been thinking about this for months. Just open the damn thing. We decided to make it a family event. I opened a bottle of wine for David and me, poured juice boxes for the kids, and we all gathered around the laptop in our living room. Emma was practically bouncing with excitement, and even Tyler seemed interested in what we might discover. Okay, I said, taking a deep breath. Here goes nothing. I clicked the link in the email, entered my login information, and waited for the page to load. The first screen showed a map of the world with different regions highlighted in various colors, indicating my ethnic heritage. It was pretty much what I'd expected, mostly British and Irish with some German and a small percentage of Scandinavian. Nothing particularly exciting or unusual, C. David said, squeezing my hand. Just like millions of other Americans, nothing scary about that, but I was just getting started. The next section showed potential DNA matches, people who shared enough genetic material with me to be possible relatives. Most of them were listed as distant cousins, with very low percentages of shared DNA, which was normal. But at the top of the list was something that made my blood run cold. There was a match labeled as close family, with a percentage that indicated either a parent, child, or sibling relationship. The profile name was just initials, Mr., with no photo or additional information. But the estimated relationship and the amount of shared DNA made it clear that this person was not a distant cousin or great-aunt. This was someone who should be a central figure in my life, someone I should definitely know about. "What does that mean?" Emma asked, pointing at the screen. "Shh, who's Mr.?" I stared at the information, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. According to the DNA analysis, this Mr. person shared enough genetic material with me to be my parent or my full sibling. But I only had 2 parents and I was an only child. Unless Jess. David's voice sounded far away. "You look like you're going to be sick." I clicked on the Mr. profile, hoping to find more information, but it was mostly blank. Just the initials, a general location listed as Los Angeles, California. And a note that this person had also taken a DNA test with the same company within the last year. No family tree information, no photos, no clues about who this mystery close relative might be. But there was a messaging feature. I could contact Mr. directly through the platform and ask about our apparent family connection. My finger hovered over the send message button, as a dozen different scenarios ran through my head. Is this a parent who'd given me up for adoption? A sibling my parents had never told me about? Some kind of mistake in the DNA analysis? "Maybe it's a glitch," David suggested, but he didn't sound convinced.
Ow.
"These tests aren't always accurate, right? Maybe you should call the company and ask them to double-check." I knew he was trying to be helpful, but the evidence was right there on the screen. This wasn't a distant cousin or a questionable family connection. The DNA percentages were too high, too specific. Whoever Mr. was, they were definitely closely related to me, and I had absolutely no idea who they could be. The kids were getting restless, and Tyler was starting to whine about being hungry. So I closed the laptop, and we moved on to dinner preparations. But my mind was spinning. How do you casually bring up with your parents that a DNA test has revealed the existence of a close family member you've never heard of? How do you even begin that conversation without sounding like you're accusing them of lying to you your entire life? That night, after the kids were in bed, I opened the laptop again and stared at Mr.'s profile. The location, Los Angeles, felt significant somehow. My mom's strange reactions to anything entertainment-related, the way people sometimes said I looked familiar. Emma's natural charisma and stage presence. Could there be a connection between our mystery relative and the entertainment industry? I started typing a message to Mr., then deleted it and started over. "What do you say to someone who's apparently your close relative, but whom you've never heard of? How do you explain that you exist without sounding crazy?" After a dozen false starts, I settled on something simple. "Hi. I just received my DNA results, and it shows we're closely related, but I don't know who you are. I'm 34 years old, born in Ohio, and as far as I know, I don't have any siblings or close relatives I haven't met. Could you help me understand our connection? This is very confusing for me. Thanks, Jessica." I stared at the message for 20 minutes before finally hitting send. Then I closed the laptop and tried to go to sleep, but my mind was racing too much to relax. Somewhere out there, probably in Los Angeles, was someone who shared my DNA in a way that suggested they were one of the most important people in my life. And I had absolutely no idea who they were or why my parents had never mentioned their existence. The next morning, there was a response waiting for me. I woke up that Wednesday morning with a sense of dread that I couldn't quite place until I remembered the message I'd sent to Mr. the night before. It was 6:30 a.m. and the house was still quiet. David was sleeping beside me, and I could hear Emma and Tyler breathing softly in their rooms down the hall. Everything was exactly as it should be, but somehow the world felt fundamentally different than it had 24 hours earlier. I crept downstairs to the kitchen, made a cup of coffee with hands that were slightly shaking, and opened my laptop. There it was, a new message notification from the DNA website. My mystery relative had responded. The message was longer than I'd expected, and as I read it, I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. "Hi, Jessica. I've been wondering when someone like you might contact me. I'm not sure how to explain this gently, but I think you might be my daughter. I'm 52 years old, and I had a relationship with a woman named Linda. When I was in college in Ohio back in 1989, she disappeared suddenly. I never knew what happened to her, or if the baby she said she was carrying was actually born. I've been hoping for years that someday I might be able to find my child. Could you tell me your mother's maiden name? And were you born around March of 1990? This is really happening? I have so much I want to tell you. My name is Michael Richards. I read the message 3 times before the words fully sank in. Michael Richards. Mr. The close DNA match wasn't a sibling or some other mysterious relative. It was my biological father, the man I'd grown up calling Dad. Robert apparently wasn't my biological parent at all. My mother had been lying to me about it for my entire life. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the coffee cup. I was born in March of 1990. My mother's maiden name was Linda Morrison. The timeline matched perfectly. But this meant that everything I thought I knew about my family, my identity, my entire life story was built on a lie. I started typing a response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. How do you respond to a message like that? How do you tell someone who might be your biological father that yes, all the details match and you've just discovered that your entire life has been based on a fundamental deception? The worst part was that it explained everything. Why there were no pictures of my maternal grandfather, maybe because he wasn't actually my grandfather. Why my mother got uncomfortable whenever anyone mentioned my resemblance to someone famous. Maybe because that someone was my actual father. Why there were no family stories or heritage or connections to extended relatives on my mom's side, because those relatives weren't actually mine, but Michael Richards. The name sounded familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. I opened a new browser window and typed the name into Google, not sure what I was expecting to find. Maybe a college professor or a businessman or just a regular person who happened to share a name with someone more famous. What I found instead made me nearly drop my laptop. The first result was a Wikipedia page for Michael Richards, the actor best known for playing Cosmo Kramer on Seinfeld. The second result was his IMDb page. The third was a recent news article about his latest project. Michael Richards wasn't just some random person who'd had a relationship with my mother in college. He was one of the most recognizable comedic actors in television history. I stared at his photo on the Wikipedia page, studying his features with new eyes. The hair was different, the face was older, but there were similarities that I'd never noticed before because I'd never had any reason to look. The shape of his eyes, the way his mouth curved when he smiled. Something about the bone structure of his face that seemed familiar in a way that had nothing to do with seeing him on TV. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Running late this morning? Can you handle school drop-off? I texted back, yes, without even thinking about it, my mind still reeling from what I'd just discovered. Michael Richards, Kramer from Seinfeld, might be my biological father. The thought was so surreal, I couldn't even process it fully. I spent the next hour reading everything I could find about Michael Richards' personal life. Looking for any mention of a relationship in Ohio in the late 1980s, there wasn't much. He'd always been fairly private about his personal relationships, but I did find several interviews where he mentioned attending Ohio State University before transferring to a college in California to pursue acting. The timeline matched perfectly with what he'd told me in his message. Emma's voice calling for me from upstairs snapped me back to reality. I had to get the kids ready for school, had to pretend that everything was normal, had to somehow function as a mother and wife. While my entire understanding of my own identity was crumbling around me. Coming, sweetheart, I called back, closing the laptop and trying to shift into mom mode. But as I helped Emma find her backpack and made Tyler's lunch, all I could think about was the message waiting for my response and the impossible reality that I might be the secret daughter of a Hollywood celebrity. The morning routine felt like I was moving underwater. Everything took twice as long as usual because I kept getting distracted by the magnitude of what I'd just learned. When Emma asked me 3 times if I'd packed her apple slices, and I kept forgetting to answer. She put her little hands on my cheeks and forced me to look at her. "Mommy, you're being really weird again," she said with the directness that only children can manage. "Are you sick?" "I'm fine, baby," I lied, kissing her forehead. "Just thinking about some grown-up stuff." But I wasn't fine. How could I be fine? Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, about my children's heritage, was suddenly in question. Was Robert actually Emma and Tyler's grandfather, or just the man who'd raised their mother? Did they have a famous grandfather they'd never known about? I have siblings in California that my kids had never met? After I dropped the kids at school, I sat in my car in the parking lot and called in sick to work. There was no way I could focus on helping customers find the perfect outfit, when my entire world had just been turned upside down. I needed to figure out how to respond to Michael Richards' message. I needed to decide whether to confront my mother about the lies she'd apparently been telling me for 34 years. I drove home in a daze, went straight to the kitchen, and opened my laptop again. Michael Richards' message was still there, still as impossible and life-changing as it had been an hour earlier. I read it again, looking for any detail I might have missed, any clue about what he was thinking or feeling or hoping for. The fact that he'd been wondering when someone like me might contact him suggested that he'd been looking for me, or at least hoping I existed. That had to mean something, right? He wasn't just some guy who'd had a meaningless fling with my mother and forgotten about it. He'd been wondering about me, maybe even missing me for decades. I started typing a response, my hands shaking so badly I had to retype most sentences multiple times. Michael, I can't believe I'm writing this, but yes, all the details match. My mother is Linda Morrison. I was born March 15th, 1990. I grew up in Ohio with the man I always thought was my father, Robert. I had no idea about any of this until yesterday. I'm married with 2 children, and I live a very normal life in Columbus. I can't even begin to process what this means or how to handle it. I've watched you on TV my entire life and never had any idea we might be related. This is the most shocking thing that's ever happened to me. I don't even know what questions to ask or where to start. Can you tell me more about your relationship with my mother? And why did she leave without telling you what happened? I read the message over and over, trying to decide if it struck the right tone. How do you talk to your potential biological father when he happens to be famous? How do you balance the personal and emotional aspects of the situation with the surreal reality that this person is someone you've seen on television for years? Finally, I hit send before I could change my mind again. Then I sat there staring at the screen, waiting for a response and trying to figure out what to do next. Should I call my mother immediately and demand an explanation? Should I wait to hear more from Michael? Should I tell David what I'd discovered? Or wait until I had more information? My phone rang, making me jump. It was my mom. "Hi, honey," she said in her usual cheerful voice. "I was just thinking about you and wondered if you ever got those DNA results back." The timing felt like more than a coincidence. Had she somehow sensed that her secrets were about to be exposed? Or was this just the universe's twisted sense of humor? "Actually, yes," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and far away. "I got them yesterday." "Oh, how exciting. Did you find out anything interesting about our heritage?" The casual way she asked the question made me feel sick. She was lying to my face, the same way she'd apparently been lying for my entire life. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand the truth immediately, but another part of me was terrified of what that truth might involve and what it would mean for our family. It was surprising, I said carefully. There were some unexpected family connections. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when my mother spoke again, her voice had changed slightly. The cheerfulness was still there, but underneath it was something else. Fear, maybe, or resignation. "What kind of connections?" she asked. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment when I either confronted her about the lies or continued pretending that everything was normal. "Mom," I said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Is Robert my biological father?" The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. I could hear my mother breathing on the other end of the line. I could almost feel her trying to figure out what to say, how much to admit. Whether she could somehow still maintain the story she'd been telling for over 3 decades. "Jessica," she said finally, and her voice was shaking. "Can you come over? This isn't the kind of conversation we should have on the phone. Just answer the question, Mom. Is Robert my biological father or not?" Another long pause. Then so quietly I almost couldn't hear her. "No, he's not." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd already known the answer. Hearing her admit it out loud made it real in a way that the DNA results and Michael's message hadn't quite accomplished. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, and hung up before she could respond. I sat in my kitchen for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My mother had finally admitted to the lie she'd been telling my entire life. Somewhere in Los Angeles, Michael Richards Kramer, from Seinfeld, was probably checking his email and waiting for my response to confirm that I was his daughter. I had to somehow figure out how to handle all of this without losing my mind completely. My laptop chimed with a new message notification. Michael had responded already. "Jessica, I can't tell you how incredible it is to finally hear from you. I've thought about you every day for 34 years, wondering if you existed, what you looked like, what kind of person you became. Your mother and I were very young, but what we had was real and meaningful, at least to me. She left suddenly one day with just a note saying she needed to start fresh somewhere else, and that she might be pregnant, but wasn't sure. I tried to find her, but she'd changed her phone number and moved without leaving a forwarding address. I've been hoping ever since that someday I might be able to connect with my child, if you actually existed. I have so many questions and so much I want to share with you. Would you be willing to talk on the phone? I understand this must be overwhelming, but I want you to know that discovering you exist is the best thing that's happened to me in years." I closed the laptop and grabbed my car keys. First, I needed to hear the whole truth from my mother. Then I could figure out what to do about the famous father I'd never known I had. The drive to my parents' house took exactly 18 minutes, but it felt both like an eternity and like no time at all. My mind was cycling through 34 years of memories, re-examining every interaction with my mother through the lens of what I now knew to be a massive deception. Every time she'd changed the subject when I asked about family history. Every time she'd gotten uncomfortable when people said I looked familiar. Every time she'd deflected questions about my grandfather or our extended family. It had all been part of an elaborate lie designed to keep me from discovering the truth about my biological father. I pulled into their driveway and sat in the car for a moment, trying to prepare myself for what was about to be the most difficult conversation of my life. Through the living room window, I could see my mother pacing back and forth, probably trying to figure out what she was going to tell me and how much of the truth she could avoid revealing. She opened the front door before I even knocked, and I could see immediately that she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked older than I'd ever seen her look before. "Where's Dad?" I asked as I walked into the house. "He went to run errands," she said quietly. I asked him to give us some privacy, so he knew. Of course he knew. They'd both been keeping this secret from me for over 3 decades, now that it was finally coming out. They'd coordinated their response just like they'd probably coordinated their lies all these years. We sat down in the living room where I'd spent countless hours as a child, doing homework and watching TV and playing board games with the man I'd always believed was my father. Now I was looking around the room and wondering what else about my childhood had been carefully constructed to maintain a fiction. "How long has Robert known?" I asked without any preamble. My mother's hands were shaking as she folded them in her lap. "From the beginning," she said. "We met when you were about 6 months old. I was working at a diner, trying to make ends meet as a single mother, and he was a regular customer. He knew I had a baby, and he knew the father wasn't in the picture. He just decided to play along with pretending to be my biological father." "It wasn't like that," she said, finally looking at me directly. "He fell in love with both of us. You were this bright, beautiful baby, and he wanted to be your father in every way that mattered. When we got married, he legally adopted you. As far as we were concerned, biology didn't matter. He is your father, Jessica. He's the one who walked the floor with you when you had colic, who taught you to ride a bike, who stayed up all night helping you with your science fair projects." I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes, but they were angry tears, not sad ones. "It's not the point, Mom. The point is that you lied to me. For 34 years, you let me believe something that wasn't true. You kept me from knowing who I really am, where I really come from. I was protecting you," she said. And now she was crying too. "You don't understand what it was like back then. I was 22 years old, pregnant, and completely alone. Your biological father was this charismatic guy who was going to be an actor. But he was also immature and unreliable and completely unprepared for the responsibility of a child. So you decided to disappear without telling him I was born?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I was scared," she said finally. "Michael was talented and ambitious, and he had these big dreams of making it in Hollywood. I could see that he was going to be successful, but I also knew that a baby would derail everything he was working toward. And I knew that I couldn't handle being a single mother while trying to follow him around the country as he pursued his career. But that wasn't your decision to make alone," I said, my voice getting louder. "You robbed him of the chance to know his daughter, and you robbed me of the chance to know my biological father. Do you have any idea what it's been like, growing up feeling like I didn't quite fit anywhere? Always wondering why I was so different from you and Dad. Why I had all these creative impulses and ambitions that didn't seem to come from anywhere? I thought I was doing the right thing, she said, sobbing now. Robert and I could give you stability and security in a normal childhood. We thought that was more important than some abstract connection to a biological father who might not even want to be involved in raising a child. But you didn't know that. You never gave him the chance to prove what kind of father he might have been. I knew enough, she said, and there was a defensive edge creeping into her voice. Michael was fun and exciting, but he wasn't reliable. He'd disappear for days at a time working on some project or audition. He was completely self-absorbed, the way a lot of artistic people are. I couldn't count on him to be there when you needed him. And yet somehow he became successful enough to star in one of the most popular TV shows in history, I pointed out. So maybe your assessment of his character wasn't entirely accurate. My mother's face went pale. You know who he is? Of course I know who he is. Michael Richards. Kramer from Seinfeld. The man whose DNA matches mine closely enough that there's no question he's my biological father. I pulled out my phone and showed her the message he'd sent. He says he's been thinking about me every day for 34 years. He tried to find you after you left, but you'd made sure he couldn't track you down. She read the message, and I watched her face go through a complicated series of expressions. Surprise, pain, maybe even a little bit of longing. He really became famous, she said quietly. Is that what this is about? You upset that you gave up your chance to be connected to a celebrity? No, she said quickly. It's not about that at all. I'm glad he found success. I really am. But Jessica, you have to understand that when I made this decision, he was just a struggling college student with big dreams and no realistic plan for achieving them. I had no way of knowing that he'd actually make it in Hollywood. But you knew he was talented. You knew he was charismatic and funny, and had that special something that makes people take notice. Those are the same qualities I've seen in Emma since she was tiny. Those are the qualities that made me think I might be able to make it as an actress when I was younger. They came from him, didn't they? My mother nodded reluctantly. You were always so much like him, even as a little girl. It's the way you could command attention when you walked into a room. The way you could make people laugh. Your natural ability to perform and entertain. Robert and I used to joke that you got your personality from the milkman, but we knew where it really came from. And it never occurred to you that maybe I deserved to know that? That maybe understanding where those traits came from would help me understand myself better? We were afraid, she admitted. As you got older and started showing more and more of those same qualities, we worried that if you knew the truth about your father, you'd want to pursue that same kind of life. You'd leave Ohio, leave us, and go chasing after some impossible dream in Hollywood. So you let me struggle with feeling like I didn't fit in my own family instead? You did fit, she said desperately. You fit perfectly. Robert loves you like you're his biological daughter. I love you more than anything in the world. We gave you a stable, loving childhood. But you also gave me a childhood built on a fundamental lie. I stood up and started pacing around the living room, too agitated to sit still. Do you have any idea how many times I've wondered why I felt so different from you and Dad? How many times I felt guilty for wanting things that seemed completely foreign to our family? I spent years thinking there was something wrong with me, because I had all these creative ambitions, but no apparent genetic explanation for where they came from. There's nothing wrong with you, my mother said firmly. You're perfect exactly as you are. But I'm not who you told me I was. My children aren't who I told them they were. Meg's been saying her whole life that she feels like maybe she's secretly a princess, and it turns out she actually is the granddaughter of someone famous. How am I supposed to explain to my 8-year-old that everything I've told her about our family history has been a lie? My mother was crying harder now, and part of me felt bad for being so harsh with her, but I was too angry and hurt and confused to moderate my tone. What else haven't you told me? I demanded. Are there other siblings out there I don't know about? Other relatives? Other lies you've been maintaining for the last 34 years? Nothing like that, she said quickly. This is the only secret, I promise. Everything else about your childhood, about our family, about who we are, that's all true. How can I believe anything you tell me now? The question hung in the air between us, and I could see that it hit her like a physical blow. She'd been my mother for my entire life, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else in the world. And now that foundation of trust had been completely shattered. I know you're angry, she said through her tears. I know you feel betrayed. but please don't let this destroy our relationship. I made a decision when I was young and scared, and maybe it was the wrong decision, but it came from a place of love. Everything I've done since then has been about protecting you and giving you the best life I could. By lying to me, by loving you and raising you and being here for you every single day of your life. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. The anger was still there, but it was mixed now with a deep sadness about how complicated this was all going to be. Because she was right. Robert had been a wonderful father to me, and my mother had been a loving, devoted parent. But they'd also built our entire family relationship on a deception, and I didn't know how to reconcile those two truths. I need some time to process this, I said finally. And I need to figure out what to do about Michael. He's waiting for me to respond to his message, and I have no idea what to tell him. Are you going to contact him? My mother asked, and I could hear the fear in her voice. I don't know, maybe. Probably he's my biological father, and he's been looking for me for 34 years. Don't you think I owe it to both of us to at least have a conversation? She nodded reluctantly. JEST, please be careful. I know you're angry with me right now, but I still want to protect you. Fame changes people, and that world can be very different from the life you've built here. I stood up to leave, then turned back to her. Does Robert know that I found out? Not yet, but I'll tell him. I love him, you know. This doesn't change the fact that he's been a wonderful father to me. But it also doesn't change the fact that you both lied to me for my entire life. I left without saying goodbye, my mind already racing ahead to the conversation I was going to have with David and the kids, and to the message I was going to have to send to Michael Richards, my biological father, the famous actor I'd been watching on television for years without knowing we shared DNA. Everything I thought I knew about my life had changed in the span of 24 hours, and I had no idea what came next. The phone call with Michael Richards happened 3 days later, after I'd had time to tell David and the kids about what I'd discovered, and after my mother had told Robert that the secret they'd been keeping for 34 years was finally out in the open. David's reaction had been exactly what I'd expected from him. Practical concern mixed with genuine support. "This is huge, Jess," he'd said after I told him everything. "This changes things for all of us, not just you. But we'll figure it out together, whatever you decide to do." The conversation with Emma and Tyler had been more complicated. How do you explain to an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old that the grandfather they've known their entire lives isn't actually their biological grandfather, and that their real grandfather is someone they've seen on TV? Emma had been fascinated and excited in the way that only children can be when faced with something that seems like a fairy tale. Tyler had been confused and a little upset, mostly because change of any kind made him anxious. "Does this mean Grandpa Robert isn't our grandpa anymore?" he'd asked, his lower lip trembling. "Of course he's still your grandpa," I'd assured him. "He's the grandpa who taught you to fish and reads you stories and loves you more than anything in the world. It doesn't change just because we found out there's another grandpa out there too." "But why didn't we know about the other grandpa before?" Emma had wanted to know. That was the question I was still struggling to answer for myself, let alone for my children. When Michael called, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of Emma's school, having dropped her off for a play date. I'd told him in my message that I would be available to talk at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and he called exactly on time. Jessica. His voice was unmistakable. The same voice I'd heard delivering punchlines as Kramer for years, but softer now, more uncertain. "Hi," I managed to say, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it through the phone. "I can't believe this is really happening," he said, and I could hear emotion in his voice. I've imagined this conversation so many times over the years, but now that it's actually happening, I don't know where to start. "Me neither," I admitted. "This is the strangest thing that's ever happened to me." He laughed, and it was such a familiar sound that it made me feel dizzy. Strange is one word for it. Wonderful is another. "Can you tell me about yourself? What you're like, what your life is like, what you've been doing for the last 34 years? So I told him about growing up in Ohio, about my brief attempt at acting, about meeting David and settling into married life, about Emma and Tyler and my job at the boutique. He listened without interrupting, asking occasional questions that showed he was really paying attention to every detail. "You tried acting," he said when I mentioned my time in Chicago. "That doesn't surprise me at all. Your mother was never interested in performing, but I always wondered if any children I might have would inherit that bug. Emma definitely has." I told him about her natural charisma and her love of being the center of attention. "She's constantly putting on shows for anyone who will watch." "I'd love to meet her," he said quietly. "I'd love to meet both of your children and your husband and to see the life you've built. But only if that's something you'd be comfortable with. The question hung in the air between us. Was I ready for that? Was I ready to introduce my children to their famous grandfather and potentially change their lives forever? Was I ready to navigate the complicated dynamics of having two fathers, one who'd raised me and one who'd given me life? "Can I ask you something?" said instead of answering directly. "Anything." "Why didn't you try harder to find us? I mean, I understand that my mother made it difficult, but you're not exactly a nobody. You have resources, connections. If you'd really wanted to track her down, couldn't you have hired someone?" There was a long pause before he answered. "I did try for a while," he said finally. "I hired a private investigator in the early 90s, but Linda had covered her tracks very well. She'd changed her name, moved to a different state, basically disappeared completely. The investigator told me that unless she wanted to be found, it was going to be nearly impossible to locate her. But you could have kept trying." "I could have," he agreed, "and maybe I should have. But at the time I convinced myself that if Linda had gone to such lengths to keep me away, maybe it was because she genuinely believed that was what was best for the baby. Maybe she thought I wasn't ready to be a father, or that my lifestyle wasn't stable enough for a child. Part of me worried that if I forced my way back into the situation, I'd just be causing problems for everyone involved." "Do you regret that decision?" "Every single day," he said without hesitation. "Not a day has gone by in the last 34 years that I haven't wondered about you. Whether you existed, what you looked like, what kind of person you were becoming. I've second-guessed that decision to stop looking for you more times than I can count." I could hear the pain in his voice, and despite my anger at my mother for keeping us apart, I felt sorry for him too. He'd spent over 3 decades not knowing if he had a child, wondering if he'd missed out on being a father entirely. "What would have happened if you'd found us when I was younger?" I asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I like to think I would have been a good father. But your mother wasn't wrong about me being immature and self-absorbed back then. I was completely focused on my career, working constantly, traveling all the time. Maybe it wouldn't have been the stable environment you needed. Maybe it would have been exactly what I needed," I pointed out. "Maybe growing up around creativity and ambition and the entertainment industry would have helped me understand myself better." "Maybe," he agreed. "Or maybe you would have been miserable as the child of someone in the public eye. There are a lot of celebrity kids who struggle with the pressure and attention that comes with that territory." We talked for almost 2 hours that first conversation, and by the end of it, I felt like I was beginning to understand both of my fathers better. Robert, who had chosen to love me and raise me, even though I wasn't biologically his, and Michael, who had been kept away from me, but had never stopped wondering about the daughter he might have had. "I need some time to figure out how to handle all of this," I told him, as the conversation was winding down. "This affects my whole family, not just me. I need to talk to my husband and my kids and figure out what feels right for all of us." "I understand completely," he said. "Take all the time you need. I've waited 34 years to know you exist. I can wait a little longer to figure out how to be part of your life. Can I ask you one more thing, of course? Are you disappointed? I mean, I'm just this ordinary person living an ordinary life in Ohio. I'm not famous or successful or particularly exciting. Are you disappointed that your daughter turned out to be so normal?" He was quiet for so long that I started to worry the call had been dropped. Then he said, "Jessica, you are a woman who tried to pursue her dreams, who found love, who built a family, who's raising children and supporting herself and creating a life full of meaning and purpose. How could I be anything but proud of that? Success isn't just about fame or money or recognition. It's about becoming the person you're meant to be and contributing something positive to the world. From everything you've told me, you've done exactly that." After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, thinking about everything that had changed in the last week. I had 2 fathers now, one who had raised me with steady, reliable love, and one who was famous and creative and had passed on the artistic genes that I'd never been able to fully understand or explain. I had children who were suddenly connected to a world of glamour and celebrity that we'd only ever seen on television. And I had a mother who had made a decision 34 years ago that had shaped all of our lives in ways we were only beginning to comprehend. 6 months later, Michael came to visit us in Ohio. It was awkward at first. How could it not be? But he was gentle and patient and genuinely interested in getting to know all of us. Emma was starstruck for about 10 minutes, then treated him like any other adult who was paying attention to her stories and performances. Tyler was shy, but warmed up quickly when Michael started helping him build elaborate Lego constructions. The most surprising thing was watching him with Robert. I'd been terrified about how they'd interact, worried that there would be tension or competition or awkwardness. Instead, they seemed to genuinely like and respect each other. Michael thanked Robert for being the father I'd needed, and Robert acknowledged that Michael had given me the creative spark that had always made me special. "She's got the best of both of us," Robert said during dinner that first night, and Michael nodded in agreement. My relationship with my mother took longer to repair. I was deeply hurt by the deception, and she was struggling with guilt and fear about how the revelation would change our family dynamics. But eventually we found our way back to each other, because love is stronger than secrets, and family is more than just biology or shared history. These days, my life looks pretty similar to what it was before the DNA test, but it feels completely different. Emma's taking acting classes and talking about maybe trying to get an agent when she's older. Tyler has started asking Michael about the technical aspects of television production, fascinated by the behind-the-scenes elements of entertainment. David and I are planning a trip to Los Angeles next summer, so the kids can see where their grandfather works and lives. And me. I'm still managing the boutique, still living in Ohio, still married to the same wonderful man, and raising the same beautiful children. But I finally understand where my creative impulses come from, and I've stopped feeling guilty about the parts of my personality that never quite fit into the life my parents had planned for me. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my mother had made different choices 34 years ago. Would I have grown up in Hollywood, surrounded by celebrities and industry professionals? Would I have become an actress myself, following in Michael's footsteps? Would Emma and Tyler have been born into a completely different world? But then I look at my family. David reading bedtime stories to Tyler, Emma practicing monologues in our living room, Robert teaching her card tricks the same way he taught me when I was her age. And I realized that every choice led us to exactly where we were supposed to be. The DNA test didn't just connect me to a Hollywood actor, it connected me to the missing pieces of my own identity, helped me understand my children's heritage, and taught me that families can be built in all kinds of ways. Biology matters, but so does choice. Love matters, but so does truth. Now, when people tell me I look familiar, I just smile and say that I get that a lot. When Emma performs her latest creation for our captivated audience of family and neighbors, I see both of her grandfathers in her confidence and creativity. And when I catch old episodes of Seinfeld on television, I watch with the knowledge that the man making people laugh on screen is the same man who calls every Sunday to check in on his granddaughter's latest theatrical endeavors. My DNA test revealed more than just ethnic percentages and family connections. It revealed that identity is complicated, that families can survive even the biggest secrets, and that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries can happen to the most ordinary people. I thought I was just a retail manager from Ohio, until a simple test proved that extraordinary was in my blood all along.